So I've been building out a new lab and I've been wanting to add some packet capture hardware. The problem is that packet capture hardware can get really expensive. So unless you have super rich friends or a real tight affiliation with a tap vendor, packet capture in a switch environment can be not just difficult, but also really expensive. Now, why do we need packet capture equipment to begin with? Well, because switches, when a packet goes in one interface, it only is going to come out the interface of the destination MAC address. So what happens is when we put a packet analyzer in another port, we're not going to be able to capture the traffic that's going through these other ports. We're only going to see broadcasts, multicasts, or traffic that's coming and going from our device. So to be able to capture that traffic, we either have to capture it by using a span monitor port, or we install a network tap to be able to capture it inline. So I actually wanted to show you this switch. Now this is a Netgear Plus Switch GS105E. You can pick it up on Amazon for like 40 bucks. Link in the description down below. But what's different about this switch is usually when they're this size, all these ports do the same thing. They just pass traffic through. It's an unmanaged switch. You can't set an IP address. You can't go on and configure it. But this one is managed, so that's a pretty cool thing. But also, it allows us to configure a mirror port. So what this means is that we can take this port and we can copy traffic over from any of the other ports that we choose to our destination port where we can put our packet capture device. So let's see how we can really set this thing up for packet capture. So the first thing that we need to do is actually plug it in. So I'm going to take from my home router and I'm going to plug it into this first port. And then on the other port, I'm going to connect a device that I want to analyze. The next thing that I need to do is I need to use the Netgear Discovery tool to actually find that switch on my network. So what you do is you bring up the Discovery tool and you go ahead and let it do what it does. It actually scans the network and it looks for this Netgear device. Once it finds one, then it tells us a little bit about it. What's its MAC address? What's the IP address? What's the firmware version? And from here, we can just go to the admin page. So let's actually go in and manage it. Now I gotta say, for a cheap little switch, the features that this switch has are pretty impressive. So here I can see that I can plug in a switch name, I can statically configure an IP address. From here I can take a look at the port status, loop detection, and so on. So I'm gonna go ahead and go over to monitoring, and I'm gonna come down here to mirroring. So here I can first configure this feature from the start. So I can come over here and I can say enable, and I want my destination port. In this case, I'd like to use this little 5th port that's on there. So I'm just going to say port number 5, and then I can choose my source ports. So I'm going to come over here and just say port number 1, and I'm going to come over and say apply. And there we go. Once I've done that, now this switch is configured. Everything coming and going from port number 1 will be copied over to port number 5. That means any packets traversing or any packets that this interface sees, I'm going to get a copy of over here on port 5. Now, in addition to that, if I have any devices over here that I need to manage, so let's just say that I'm remotely connecting to an analyzer that I have snapped in here, this will still accept packets. So that's a pretty interesting feature as well. You can still transmit into that monitor port and receive traffic back out. But before we really trust this user interface, let's actually make sure that it really works. So of course, right here, I brought up Wireshark on the right, and I still have my management over here on the left. What I did off camera is I have a machine that's plugged into port 2, and it's sending a ping to a router that's on port number 1. And I have it set up just as we have. Everything coming and going from port number 1 is going over to port number 5. Now, my laptop is connected to port 5, so I can capture all the traffic over on port 5 that's coming in and out of port number 1. So I'm going to first disable this to see if we can see that ping, and then I'm going to enable it and see if that ping comes through. So first I'm going to come over here to the left. I'm just going to say no. I want to disable this and just apply that. So right now I just turned port mirroring off. If I come over here to the right, I'm just going to select my interface, and what I want to do is I actually want to use a capture filter here. So I'm just going to say ICMP. So now I will only capture ICMP traffic coming into my interface here. Right now I don't see anything, but if I peek over to my machine, it's actually connected on port number 2, and it is sending pings through this switch out port 1 to the default gateway. So let's actually come in here and see if this works. So I'm going to go mirroring back to enable, and I'm going to come over here and just say source port will be port 1. The destination port is going to be port 5. Let's go ahead and say apply, and let's see what happens. Let's see what we capture. Right there, we start to see the pings come through. So 136 is the source of those pings going through to 4.1, and then I see the traffic going in the opposite direction. So this actually is working. Port 5 now becomes a span port that I can use for monitoring my network. Now, one last little thing that I think is very cool with this switch is it doesn't duplicate traffic. One thing you got to watch out with some switches, when you are configuring a port mirror, you don't want to configure more than one port as a source typically. The reason is if a packet goes into port 1 and we capture it over on port 5, then it comes out of port 2 and we send a second copy over to port 5, on my capture point, it'll look like a duplicated packet. But really, I just captured that single packet twice. I caught it ingress to port 1 and egress on port number 2. But what's interesting with this switch is it doesn't duplicate traffic. So right now I have both interfaces that are set to be sources, but I don't see packet duplication. So I don't see 2 requests and 2 replies back to back. So what that tells me is that this Netgear, it's allowing both interfaces to be sources without duplicating traffic over to port 5. And that's pretty cool. So I think these little switches are great. I actually have in my home office, I've got about 3 of them. If I go out to a customer site, usually I'll toss one in my bag, and that just allows me to quickly insert a switch that I know can do port mirroring. So no matter if you use this, a tap, or whatever you're using, make sure that you're capturing the correct way in a switched environment. Thanks for stopping by, everybody. I'll see you again.